Hello, my name is LoG, and welcome to another edition of LoG Lessons and Tracks. For this little mini-series, we're going to focus on the sound that is minor with the powerful flat 5. This note is fascinating for two reasons. Number one, I guarantee you've heard this note before, and I can pretty much guarantee that you've played it. For example, if you ever played Heartbreaker by Led Zeppelin, or Enter Sandman by Metallica, or any of the hundreds, if not thousands, of songs that also feature this note, you have definitely come across it in your guitar playing life. This is because this note comes from blues and is often described as the blue note or the blues note, and pretty much every guitar-based genre that exists today borrows to some extent from blues. You're bound to hear this note at least once in a while. The other reason why this note is so fascinating is because it is not in the key. No matter what context you find yourself in, if you are playing standard minor, so 1 flat 3 5 minor triad, or minor pentatonic 1 flat 3 4 5 flat 7, or really any minor situation that you come across, flat 5 is never in any of those minor sounds. So when you play this note, you will be out of the key. But that gives us some interesting opportunities because, of course, we can play this note in a more subtle, kind of passive way just to add a little bit of extra color, but we can also really feature this note, bringing it out, making that out-of-key quality stand out in our playing. That's what we're going to experiment with throughout the next series of videos, with this first video today going over using the note in a more passive way, which is by far the most common way that you'll hear most players use it. Let's first listen to what that sounds like. Don't forget to check out the corresponding backing track for this lesson at the link above or below in the description. And as usual, if you enjoy this type of instructional material, feel free to check out my Patreon at the other link below. And now let's get on to the lesson. So the first thing we have to do is figure out where the flat 5 is located. Fortunately, it's pretty much right in the name. It is a flatted 5. So if you know where 5 is when you're playing minor pentatonic, just move that note back 1 fret. So if I'm playing E flat minor pentatonic, the key of the corresponding backing track, I'll start right here on the A string. So that's my 1 flat 3 4 5 flat 7 1, like your standard minor pentatonic. Well, if I know where 5 is, it's right there in the shape. 1 flat 3 4 5, move back 1 fret. That's your flat 5. So now I'm going to add that to the passage. 1 flat 3 4 flat 5 5 flat 7 1, and backwards. I'm sure you've heard that sound before. Like I just mentioned, insanely common. So this creates like a nice little easy kind of playing situation because we have 4 flat 5 and 5 in a row and a nice little easy to play, almost like small chromatic scale sort of figure. So it's very physically easy to play. And remember, that flat 5 is happening. That note is not in the key, but playing it like this kind of masks that note a little bit because we're playing 4 and 5 as well, always in order. We're always moving through the flat 5 or back down. The flat 5 is always being played kind of in between the two normal notes, the 4 and the normal 5. Those notes act as like a buffer for that note. So when you do play it, you're not really hearing it. You just kind of feel the color that it creates, but you're not really like blasting that note like crazy or featuring it or bringing it out like we will in later videos. In this situation, we're just using it as a passing tone, by far the most common way to play this note. So what we're going to do today is play this figure always kind of in passing, but experiment with a variety of different fingerings that we can play with these 3 little notes that will just give us different ideas. So the first fingering is pretty much what I just played right there, when you have all 3 of them in a row on the same string. So now that we know that that exists, we want to find an easy way to access this little group of notes. Fortunately, it's very simple. All you need to know, first of all, is your root at all times, no matter where you are. You want that root to be highlighted on the fretboard because that is how you're going to be able to find the rest of the notes. So we're playing E flat right now. So as long as I know how to find all my E flats, I should be able to access this sound very easily because all I need to do is look for the 5 or look for the 4 and move accordingly. So if I play E flat right here, I know 4, if this is my 1, 4 is always down a string. So if this is 1, that's 4. If I see that 4, I can walk up through the flat 5 to the normal 5. Just like that. And then on the other side, if I see this as 1, I see this as 5, always up a power chord. And I can see that note and walk back down to 4 through the scale or kind of wherever I want to go. That is going to be the structure for every single situation you find yourself in if you can highlight a root. So here's a root right here, E flat. Same E flat, just different location. Guess where 4 is? Down a string, just like it was right here. Walk up. How about the 5? Here's my root, power chord up. That's the 5, walk back. It's that easy. How about the E flat up top? Same thing. If that's 1, that's 4. If this is 1, that's 5, power chord. Walk backwards. Move through however you want to play. Now, the only time where this doesn't happen like that, nice and neatly like I just displayed, is between the G string and the B string, because in standard tuning on the guitar, that B string kind of forces all of the note locations to be shifted up by 1 fret. But once you know that, still just as easy to play. You just have to remember that. If this is your root, that is not 4 anymore. 4 is here. So 1, 4, flat 5, 5. Same thing, power chord is not this anymore, it is that. So 1, 5, flat 5, 4. And you just kind of move around however you want. The next thing to do is very similar to that, but instead of looking up towards the 4th or the 5th for your starting location, move down or look down to a lower register to find those notes. So for example, if this is the 1, I know this is 5, like I just mentioned, up a power chord, but 5 is also located here, right? Where is that? That's just down an octave from this upper 5th right there. If that's 1, I know that's 5, but now I also know if this is 1, that is 5. So that means I can go 5, flat 5, 4, maybe flat 3, and then 1 right there. Same thing, if this is 1, I can target 4 right here. It's almost like down a reverse power chord, right? That's 4, so that means 4, flat 5, 5, maybe flat 7, 1, continue in a kind of a typical phrase like that. So always being able to look for these starting locations, starting on your 4, walking up to 5, starting on your 5, walking down to 4. Be able to find these locations kind of in any direction. Don't always feel like you have to look up past the root you're on. Also look down below it, because those would be just other locations that you can use to experiment with. So now that we have those locations, we can also start to experiment with other ways to play the other notes of the scale to kind of give us different positions. And that's kind of the beauty of this exact fingering that we have right here. When we play all 3 of these notes on 1 string, very easy to play, very comfortable to play, because it's just you flop your fingers down on 1 string, flows really nicely. But also, we can get into this little group of 3 notes easily from 2 different positions. So for example, if I'm playing my root here on my pointer finger, here's my root, I can play 1, flat 3 on the same string, and then right there 4, flat 5, 5, kind of how I've been playing it, right there, very comfortable. But if I happen to be in a different position where my root is on my ring finger, and my flat 3, I'm not playing it right there, I'm playing it right here, it's the same note, right? That, and that same thing, just different way to play it. Those 3 notes are still pretty accessible. I can play 1, flat 3, and then 4, flat 5, 5, kind of with all my fingers. I can do that, or I could just slide up pretty easily. 1, flat 3, slide up 4, flat 5, 5. That's a really super typical way to play that figure. Like flat 7, 1, next string, flat 3, slide up 4, flat 5, 5. And then maybe come down right here. Right, so I'm coming down in a different position because this group of 3 notes, this little chromatic 4, flat 5, 5, works in both positions. In this position where your pointer finger's on the root, or in this position where your ring finger's on the root. This, the way I describe this in my own teaching is, depending on where the root is, I consider this like right shape because the notes are generally to the right of your starting note, and I consider this maybe center shape because the notes are kind of centered around your starting note. If you're interested in that stuff, you can check out my Patreon because I get deep into all of that type of stuff. So yeah, this fingering is really good for that reason. So if you're practicing this stuff, just make sure you can locate the 4 and the 5 and just know, okay, if I'm playing 4, I can walk up a little chromatic figure, 3 notes worth. If I'm playing 5, I can walk backwards. So the main thing is just try to figure out various ways to access these 3 notes from around the fretboard. And with that in mind, let's go over some really typical ways we can kind of connect some scales with these 3 notes and create some interesting licks. So the easiest way to get started with a new sound like this is to take one of the simple shapes that we just went through and run that shape in multiple octaves. All you have to do is make sure that your starting note, the root in this case, is always being played with the same finger, and all of the other notes should line up accordingly. So if I'm playing that first shape, starting with my pointer finger on the root, it's always going to move pinky, 1 flat 3 on the same string. Next string 4 flat 5 5, our little trio of notes with the flat 5. Flat 7 1. But instead of playing 1 with my ring finger, I'm going to play 1 again with my pointer finger. That sets me up to do the same shape one more time. Again, you have to accommodate the B and high E strings because of the tuning issue of the guitar, but I think you'll get that once you start playing it. I'll play that whole thing up and down. Again, this is the same shape, just 2 different octaves. Figure out, where you want to alternate pick or hammer on pull-off slide. I'll kind of leave that up to you. But it really is that simple. It's the same shape, 2 octaves in a row, up and down. And once you have that shape, of course, run it up and down, but I wouldn't do that too much. You want to think about running scales up and down, just straight up and down, as more of like a mechanics type thing to practice or mechanical exercise. But I would immediately start kind of improvising or creating little patterns or just different ways to move around the scale so that it sounds a little bit more musical and you're not just running up and down. So maybe something like this. Just little ways to navigate, see where your hands naturally take you and move forward like that. Next, kind of position to do this in would be on the E string right here, same key, E flat, same exact shape, right? 1 flat 3 on the same string, 4 flat 5 5, flat 7 1, but instead of playing 1 with the ring finger, I'm going to slide up with the pointer finger, and that allows me to play the exact same shape again. Again, adapting for the B string, shifting up when I have to. Here's my 1. Instead of playing with the ring, pointer finger. And again, experiment with how you want to navigate throughout those shapes, just like I did earlier. And play these wherever you want. Like, it doesn't have to be in this position. Do what you can. So, for example, if I want to do it right here on this E flat, that would take me maybe not 2 full octaves, but it would move me to a higher position. 1 flat 3, same string, right? 1 flat 3, our trio of notes. Flat 7 1. Instead of playing 1 with the ring finger, play with the pointer, just like we did. And that allows us to get one more little position. And we can move kind of however we want. That's the first thing. The next step is do the exact same idea, but with the other configuration. So instead of 1 flat 3, we have 1 flat 3. So that's flat 3, 4, flat 5 5, all on the same string, right? That gives us this like big 4-note passage. Of course, you don't have to play it like this with all 4 fingers. You can kind of slide up if you want. Regardless, all of those notes, flat 3, 4, flat 5 5, are all on the same string. So if I run this shape, again, just making sure that I'm starting on the same note, or the same finger, I should say, on my root, and everything should line up. So if I start, let's say, middle finger right here. Middle finger, pointer, and I'm going to use all 4 fingers. Right? Then pointer, middle, that's the root right there, and guess what I can do? Same configuration, right? Offset, of course, by a fret because we're hitting the B string at that point, but same shape. If I do it up top, a little bit easier, so I'm going to start middle finger again. Pointer, middle, there's my root, restart with the middle finger. Pointer, root with the middle finger. And you get that same shape. Really easy to play, this one in particular, because it flows really well because you got all 4 of those notes, flat 3, 4, flat 5 5, all on the same string. That would sound like this if I did like a run out of it. I'm going to start on flat 7 to kind of give me a little pickup into it. Right, really nice figure that flows pretty well once you get it down. Kind of tough up here because your fingers get kind of crammed, but back in the lower registers can absolutely work. Again, I can start lower if I want to. If this is my root, I can start on the flat 3 right here. How did I know that was there? Because if this is 1, that's flat 3 down an octave. So I can play flat 3, 4, flat 5, 5. There's that little 4-note group. I can start lower and then build up. Still looking at this note as my root, though. I'm just not starting on the root. right? Get some nice little passages out of it. Same ideas we talked about before, create some little patterns, simple little things that feel comfortable as you're moving through. But that's like the easiest thing to do once you get this sound. Just start connecting very simple scale passages. Notice I'm not like, well, not yet. We're about to get into that stuff, but I'm always keeping the same three notes, the target notes that we're talking about, that 4, flat, 5, 5, all on the same string. And that forces us into just a handful of fingerings. So connect these octaves, connect these scales through different octaves, and you'll immediately get some ideas out of it. So with that in mind, let's now go over some more kind of like typical ways to approach these three notes and little licks. Now, of course, you can do whatever you want with this little trio of notes, but in my opinion, the best way and the easiest way to use these three little notes is use them as like a pickup or a building off point into something else. So let's say I want to hit this note right here, like flat 7, or maybe the root of the key or root of the chord. What I can do is play the 4, flat, 5, 5 first and then hit that note, and that note will have just a little bit more impact as we're building into it with this little figure. Right? Or the root. Right? So when I play that root, or excuse me, when I play that little trio of notes first and then the root feels like it lands harder, right? And you could do this with a variety of things. You don't have to do it with single notes. You can do it with more of like a lick. Something like that, right? Still building into that with those three notes. And again, if you find one that you like, immediately start doing it in a variety of positions. So let's say I like this one. Right? That's our little trio of notes, flat 7, flat 3, 1. If I like that, I'm immediately going to try to do it, let's say right here. Figure out the intricacies of the fingering, one not to get it down. Same thing up top. Same thing right here. You immediately want to do that because you don't just want to have a lick that works in one spot. You want to have that lick working everywhere. You don't want the location of where you're playing to hold you back, right? You want to have these ideas kind of copy and pastable everywhere. Now, you could do this with a variety of things. You don't have to do it with like a shorter one like that. You can do it with a longer run. That's the same sort of idea, right? Just moving through the shape with some figures that I like, but starting with that 4, flat 5, 5. You can do it maybe into a chord, little things like that. How many times have you heard licks like that? That's like super common. Really, really common way to approach that little shape. Another one that's kind of a little bit less useful but fun if you want to do it, and that's using it as this like kind of bottom foundation that you're always coming back to while you jump up to other notes. So I'm going to do something like this. I'm going to play ascending 4, flat 5, 5 right here. Jump up, grab a note, maybe flat 7, and then walk back. And then go up again, jump up, grab another note like the root. So over and over again. Get some kind of, interesting sounding licks, a little less useful because they're, I don't know how often you'll be able to put that in. It's a very significant sound, but still something you can kind of experiment around with. And again, it's all based on how easy it is to play these three in a row like this, 4, flat 5, 5. So again, experiment with whatever you want. Try to find some interesting ideas. Just make sure you're able to recreate those ideas around the fretboard and really think about whenever you're doing this idea, the fact that you're really playing that flat 5 in the midst of the 4 and the normal 5. So with that in mind, let's now transition over to some truly different fingerings that take these core notes, the 4, flat 5, 5, and place them on different strings. So the process of coming up with different fingerings for this core little 3 group of notes is very simple. All we're doing is we're taking one of the notes and simply moving it to the next string down. So we're going to do that first with the 5. We're simply going to find the 5, which is right here, B flat, and we're going to move it down a string. Now we're not moving it to a different octave. We're playing the exact same note, unison note, just at a different location. And that location would be here. If this is 4, flat 5, 5, this note is B flat. This is where we're moving that B flat. So instead of 4, flat 5, 5, we're going to play 4, flat 5, 5 right there. So you can see kind of where this sort of forces our hand to live when we play this idea, right? Originally, when we were doing this, we were kind of able to play here, also here, right? We had 2 kind of starting locations. But with this one, because we really have to play in this position, starting here doesn't really make too much sense because we would start with our pointer finger here, pointer, flat 3, root, flat 3, and then 4, flat 5, 5, right? It's kind of an odd jump. nothing wrong with it. You can make the jump if you want. But if you want a smooth flowing scale without any of these massive jumps kind of out of nowhere, we would probably have to start our positioning right here with the root on the ring finger, flat 3 on the next string. That would look like this. Right? So 1, flat 3, 4, flat 5, 5, flat 7, and then maybe 1 right there, slide up 2 frets, or 1 here on the B string. So you can see in this position, starting with the ring finger, moving down to the flat 3 on the next string, seems to be the optimal way to play this configuration when the 5 is on a different string. So you might be saying, why would I want to play it like this in the first place? It's not as adaptable as the 3 notes on one string, and it seems harder to play. We have this big, like, awkward stretch, ring finger, pinky, pointer. Maybe I can do like a little slide or something, but regardless, it feels not as comfortable as the other fingering. And this is the main reason why having a variety of fingerings will kind of open up a bunch of different options for you, because different fingerings will yield different ideas that you wouldn't naturally come up with if you were just using one fingering all of the time. So let's go over kind of what I mean by that and how you can discover little ideas. The first thing that I noticed right off the bat is the tone difference of this core group of notes, the 4, flat 5, 5. When I do it on one string, they all sound pretty uniform because they're all on the same string. The D string is going to sound like the D string regardless of where I play it. But now, because I have 4, flat 5, and 5, that 5 right there, the 5 is now on the G string, a higher string. That note is naturally going to pop out more, or maybe have more of an accent than the other two, because I'm playing the G string. The G string is innately a brighter string than the D string for the most part. So when I play this figure, if I just go back and forth, just simply picking them, that's on the D string. Everything sounds pretty uniform. But now if I play the 5 on the G string, you can immediately hear that 5 popping out. So if you want that 5 to kind of pop out in your tune or in your line, this fingering is really great for that, especially if you want to use some techniques like, hammer-ons and pull-offs to maybe soften the 4 to the flat 5 and then really dig in, pick attack with that 5. Works really well with this fingering. That 5 is going to pop out super hard. And if you want to maybe use like picking fingers like I often do, maybe pick, hammer on, middle finger to grab the 5. That 5 really pops out mostly because, again, it's on a higher string. What else do we notice right here? Well, what I can do, which I couldn't do in the previous fingering, is I can hammer on 5 to flat 7 because those notes are on the same string in this position. 1, flat 3, 4, flat 5, 5, flat 7 right here. I couldn't do that in this original position, right? Because where was 5? Here, flat 7 on a different string. Now, of course, I can maybe like do something like that, but that's kind of now breaking into a different position. With this configuration, though, that 5 and flat 7 being on the same string, being hammer-onable or pull-offable, is built into this fingering. So that just gives us some opportunities if we want to do something like a quick little hammer-on pull-off. Like, I'm sure you've heard licks like that before. Those are really, really common, and that is due to placing the 5 on the G string while keeping the 4 and the flat 5 on that lower string, in this case, the D string. This is also really great if you want to play a string of notes using the sound without changing positions. So if you remember before, when we were taking this one shape that we had, and we're doing like a long scale run with it, because I'm only using one configuration of the notes, I have to move positions. But now, because I know 2 different fingerings for the same thing, it will allow me to stay in one position. Watch this. Here's the new one that I just came up with. Right? That's keeping me in this spot. Now, of course, I can slide up and do the same thing over and over again. That would look like this. There's my root, do the same thing. 1, flat 3, 4, flat 5, 5. There's that same move. 4, flat 5 on one string, 5 on the next. Flat 7, hammer-onable, right there. So I can, of course, do the same thing twice. But what happens if I did this? Watch this. Instead of playing 1 right here, I played 1 here. Look at what note what finger I'm on, the pointer finger. So I can continue with the same fingering that we just learned. Pointer, pinky, and then the trio of notes on one string. So see what I can do by combining both of those fingerings that allows me to stay fully in this position. Whereas with the other shapes, I would have to move because I'm just using the same shape, copying and pasting it up an octave. But when you start combining different fingerings for the same shape or the same set of notes, you can kind of formulate them in a way where you can stay in a position or come up with a comfortable fingering, something that works really well for what you're trying to do. I mean, I could do this too. Check this out. Different fingering again. That's an odd one, right? What did I do right there? 1, flat 3, 4, flat 5, normal 5. There's our little adjustment. Flat 7. And then instead of playing 1 with my pointer finger and continuing with that standard shape, I played the other one that we did. Middle finger, pointer, then all 4 notes on one string. So watch what I did right there. Little transition. What are some options I can get there? I now have a way to maybe hold a bunch of notes together in a way that I couldn't do before. Watch this. Right, so what did I just play? 5, flat 7, 1, flat 3. I can hold them all at the same time, and I discovered that shape by mixing these 2 different fingerings. So even though as you're learning a shape or learning a figure, it might not seem like it's valuable right off the bat, but once you start experimenting and seeing different ways to connect, you'll find all these unique ideas and shapes that you can't play in the other configurations, right? If I wanted to play flat 7, 1, flat 3 at the same time, like I am right here, I'll play that one more time. That's not possible in the other shapes that I was messing around with, right? Right here. Can't do that, right? Because flat 7, 1 were always on the same string when I was using those original fingerings. But because I've discovered this new one, it gives me different options, right? That's always one of the main reasons why coming up with different fingerings for anything that you're doing is so valuable. It'll just give you new ideas that maybe you wouldn't come across otherwise, right? So that's this fingering, right? Of course, there's a bunch of other things, a bunch of other approaches you can do. You can just string together the same scale like we just talked about. But with all that in mind, let's now go over how to use this configuration. 4 flat 5 on one string, 5 on the next. We'll come up with a bunch of licks that are actually a lot more common than you might think. So if you think this configuration is kind of a rare one that most people don't use because it's very stretchy and your fingers have to kind of have this big distance between them when you play them, all you have to do is move this figure starting with the root on the D string and you will realize how wrong you are. So check this out. If I take the same configuration, 1, next string, flat 3, 4, flat 5, next string, 5, flat 7, what that is on the D string looks like this. 1, flat 3, 4, flat 5, 5, flat 7, 1. That's one of the most standard classic like blues scales that you've ever played on the guitar. It comes from this standard classic minor pentatonic. That shape, we're just adding in the flat 5, 1 fret above the 4, but keeping the 5 on the next string like we just did. That's that classic shape, right? And of course, again, we can always dip into any of the other fingerings that we just went through, right? Keeping all 3 of those notes on one string. In this case, we're just moving the 5 right here to the next string, which puts it right there. The shape is a lot easier because the kind of finger distance between the flat 5 and the normal 5 when you do it on the G string and B string is only 2 frets, whereas when you do it on every other string, like if I did it here again, we have 3 frets. You can see 1, 2, 3 in between my pinky and pointer. So it's just physically easier to play it up here. And this is by far the most common spot that you're going to see this shape play, this configuration of notes. Again, 4, flat 5 on one string, 5 on the next. You'll hear stuff like this. Stuff like that, where it's like little patterns that move back and forth between those notes, utilizing that 5 on the next string, kind of hearing it pop out. You can really hear that 5 pop out when I pick it, hammering onto the flat 7 again. That's another thing that's unique to the shape. Can't hammer onto the flat 7 when you're doing it with this configuration because you have 5, flat 7 on the next string. If you want that normal hammer-on sound, this is the shape to play it in. Again, having multiple fingerings gives you new things to play. And then not to mention, we can have 5, flat 7, and then bend up to 1. So you can do like a nice little run like... right? And that's using the 4, flat 5 on one string, 5 on the next. So if you value this shape, learn it around the fretboard. You don't feel like you have to play it in the difficult positions. Like this shape is definitely more taxing on your hand because it is much more of a stretch. But again, just be aware that it is available in case you want to find, some different fingerings or some new ideas, or you find a lick that you really like in this kind of easy spot. You can copy and paste it around the fretboard. Like here's one that's really easy, one that a lot of people use. 5, hammer on to flat 7, dip down to the flat 5, just touch that note, come right back. It's a really classic one. Again, that one is possible in this way with this technique because the 5 and the flat 5 are on different strings, right? So that's a really classic one. Another really nice thing about this configuration, which again, not possible in the other one, because we have flat 5 and 5 on different strings, we can play them at the same time, okay? Which is going to get us a pretty nasty sound, but that's kind of the point of this note, right? This note is innately dissonant, innately nasty. So if we want to bring that out, we definitely can right here because we have 4, 5 on 2 different strings, so I can play them simultaneously. Here's 4, 5 again, just to give you a reference. Here's 1, flat 3, 4, just minor pentatonic, right? 4, 5 at the same time, but at any moment I can get that flat 5. You'll hear those licks all the time where people will bar this, kind of play almost like an E flat minor chord, right? Flat 3, 5, hammer onto the 4, and then the flat 5. Right? I'm even just playing the whole thing right there. That's flat 3, 5, 1. That's an E flat minor chord. Still doing those same hammer-ons. Again, it's nasty, but that's the point, right? It sounds really unique when you do that. And again, this configuration allows us to do that. We couldn't do that in the other configuration where we had 4, flat 5, 5 on the same string. Can't play, 2 notes at the same time on the same string. Has to be on different strings. That allows us, this fingering allows us to do that. You can also do other things like move some other notes. Like that one too. So I'm moving the 1, 2, flat 3 and the flat 3, 4, flat 5 at the same time. So it's like these 2 little notes. And I'm just keeping this ringing the whole time. A lot of cool little ideas you can come up with. And again, all of that is based on finding this flat 5 with a different fingering. And you can take all these shapes, move them around the fretboard, find different ways to connect them, find different kind of variations on them that are unique. That's the value of having these different fingerings. And again, kind of like what I mentioned earlier, it'll also allows you to stay in one position. Like for example, I've been doing it either on this E flat, right? Like that. I've also been doing it here. What happens if I did it right here on this E string? Let's just see what happens. A little bit easier to play because I'm higher up, frets are smaller, so that jump will be a little bit easier. It's going to be the same distance as it was down here, just frets are smaller, so it's slightly easier. 1, flat 3, 4, flat 5, 5, right there. And then you know what I can do? Flat 7, slide up 2 frets, do the whole thing over again with the easier octave. And then maybe I'm here, jump up and do all 4 notes on one string. 1, flat 3, 4, flat 5, 5. So I've got a nice kind of like hybrid shape where I'm using different fingerings sort of each time. I'll do that one more time. I've got all those kind of like nice configurations. And again, applying patterns, applying things that are unique to that fingering to just give you some more variety, some more different shapes. Or if I wanted to stay in one position, like I mentioned earlier, I could do the same thing. Watch this. 5, flat 7, instead of going to 1 right here and restarting, 1 right here. Look what finger I'm on. Pointer finger. That allows me to do this fingering. The standard one we just did before. So you see what I'm doing there? I'm kind of like going up and down, moving through different fingerings, just noticing where I am, noticing the notes that are under my fingers. Like if I feel 5, flat 7 under my fingers, I know I can come down the fingering that I just came up with. 5, flat 7, 5, right down to flat 5, 4, flat 3, and then here's 1. Or I can go flat 3, 1, and descend like that. A lot of cool little ideas you can come up with just by experimenting again with these fingerings. So this one in particular, I think it's really great if you want to kind of get into it. Do this, start on the D string position because it's really easy to play. Do little licks like that, maybe that little hammer-on pull-off. Really classic, like little ideas like that. Definitely experiment with playing the 5 and the flat 5 at the same time, little chords. Super classic. You can also bend as well. Here's the 5. I'm going to play the 4, bend up to the 5. Classic unison bend. But now I'm going to bend up only to the flat 5. Again, gives you a different sound, and that's only possible with this fingering. So with all that in mind, let's now transition over to the last fingering. We're going to move the flat 5 to the next string alongside the normal 5. This last fingering is probably the more rare of the 3, and it's a little tricky because it can kind of take you to 2 different positions. Whereas when we played the other 2 fingerings we just did, it was pretty clear what position was comfortable to stay in. Like if we did it like this, very comfortable to continue like that. If we did the variation on that back here, again, very comfortable. If we did the new fingering, the one we just did earlier, 4 flat 5 on one string, 5 on the next, again, that feels pretty comfortable to stay right here. And we can slide up, move wherever we want to go. But this one, we kind of have like 2 different areas we can move to depending on what fingers we use. So what are we doing here? Same idea. 1, flat 3, 4, but instead of playing flat 5, 5, or flat 5, 5, we're now playing 1, flat 3, 4, flat 5, 5 on the next string. So it's 4 by itself, and then flat 5, 5 on the next string, which requires us to do kind of a little big of a stretch to grab this A back here, the flat 5. Will look like this. So if I play with that fingering, little slide, pointer finger, flat 5, 5, 1, flat 3, 4, flat 5, slide up to the 5, flat 7, continue. It feels kind of like the fingering we just talked about. That one. But if I happen to maybe, instead of use my pointer finger and then slide, if I do pointer finger, middle finger, that kind of now puts me back here. So watch this. Now it kind of feels like I'm doing this. That original fingering just starting on this E flat. So you can see, depending on the fingering, this one will really kind of point you in different directions, which could be really valuable if that's something that you are wanting to experiment with. I like this one a lot because it feels, that flat 5 really feels like a very casual grace note. Because what are we doing with one of the fingerings? We're doing this. Just a little slide, right? How often do you do that? Playing and just sliding into a note. It's kind of like a very classic, like jazzy approach to playing notes like this, the kind of subtle little grace note slide. This one works perfectly for that. Because that grace note, the flat 5, is on the same string as the 5, meaning you can easily slide up into it. Right? And it also kind of feels like you're playing that standard pentatonic right here. 1, flat 3, 4, 5, flat 7, and you're just sneaking in that little passing tone. This one is also going to play a big part in future videos where we start to feature and focus on this flat 5 more. And the way we're going to do that is by removing some of the nearby notes. So for example, if I do this, like that shape was me playing 1, flat 3, right to flat 5. I'm not even playing the 4. So I'm not really using the flat 5 kind of hidden in between the 4 and the 5. I'm just jumping right to it. And this particular fingering is really nice for certain licks like that. Something like that, right? I played 1, flat 3. I didn't play 4 right here. I just skipped it and went right to the flat 5. Almost get like a little diminished triad out of that. Like that, something we'll talk about in a later video. So that's a really nice one. And just like the previous fingering, this one is way easier and way more usable when you put it into that classic position up top on the D string like we did the previous one. So here's the root on the D string. Flat 3, 4, flat 5, 5, right? Way easier to play. The notes are closer together, way easier to grab. And you can get some interesting things like a little hammer-on pull-off flat 5, 5, down to 4. A little bit different, right? Just kind of a different little configuration. Maybe you can do a little combination. Here's the one we just did. 4, flat 5, next string 5. Slide back. Right, some kind of interesting, maybe kind of odd sounding licks. Pretty easily doable when you're mixing the 2 fingerings. This is the second fingering we talked about, and this is the new one. right? It's literally moving one note, right? The 4 is still in the same location. The 5 is still in the same location. This time, we're just moving where the flat 5 is. We're either playing it here, up a fret from the 4, and now we're playing it back a fret from the 5 right there. I'm also sneaking a little bit of 2 right there, kind of getting that sound just because it's cool and it's pretty comfortable to play because I've got 2, flat 3, flat 5, 5. How easy is that? See how different that sounds? It sounds like I'm playing like some fancy scale right there. I'm playing minor with flat 5, but I'm featuring the flat 5 a little bit more by jumping right to it, something we're going to talk about in later videos. So yeah, this is a really good one. It's just, you kind of have to work through it a little bit to kind of find the use, because the use might not be as obvious, definitely not as obvious as that classic shape from the beginning, or even the one we did after that. So you just have to kind of figure it out, mess around with some ideas, see what you come up with. One that I do like with this fingering that's a little bit challenging, but I was kind of messing around with it earlier today, and I kind of found some value out of it. If you like these kind of 3-note per string, larger scale runs, if that's something you like, you can try this. So watch this. Kind of the same position that I would be in starting the normal shape that we talked about in the beginning. 1, flat 3, 4, flat 5, 5. Those 3 notes on one string are core little notes. But instead of doing that, 1, flat 3, 4 on the same string. So you're reaching up like this. Kind of one of these deals where I've got the first 3 notes of the pentatonic on one string. And then what I'm going to do, flat 5, 5 on the next string, the same fingering we're talking about right now. Reach up and play flat 7. So I've got 3 notes here, 3 notes here of the full pentatonic scale with the flat 5. And then maybe go up right here, repeat the flat 7 like a lot of people do. 1, grab flat 3. So I've got this figure. It's pretty cool. Let me try it down here where it's a little bit brighter sounding. Let's see what it sounds like. Pretty difficult to play, at least for me in this stretch, but that's a really cool one. And again, how did I come up with that? By thinking about the configuration where 4 is on one string right here, and then flat 5, 5 on the next string, like that. So because I experimented with that fingering and was actively thinking about it, I discovered that shape, which could turn out to be really useful. So that's kind of the name of the game, really, with this first video in this series. Kind of like a hidden lesson is the importance of fingerings, right? The importance of having a variety of fingerings, because every time you reconfigure, and remember, what am I doing? I'm moving one note at a time of just the 4, flat 5, 5. I took this chord little group of notes and just started moving one at a time to another string, getting a wide variety of these different ideas and getting ideas that I wouldn't get otherwise if I didn't go through that process, right? Super important, super valuable. So that's pretty much this fingering. So now let's wrap up this video with kind of some loose ends and just some other lick ideas that I personally like, as well as experimenting with the sound over major. All right, so I'm just going to go through a couple licks that I like that are kind of based on everything that we talked about so far. Let's get started with this first one. We sort of already went over this, but just a couple little variations on it, and that's playing the flat 5 and the 5 at the same time. So the easiest way to do that is up here in this position, starting on the D string, root, 1, flat 3, 4, flat 5 on one string, and then 5 on the next. You get them both at the same time. Of course, you can just play it. You can also bend up to it. Fun thing about that one is the bend doesn't really have to be in tune. It's supposed to sound nasty, so how in tune your nastiness is doesn't really matter. You can also do it right here on the G string. That one sounds extra kind of bright or has an extra bite to it because you're dealing with the top 2 strings. Looks a little bit different because of the tuning, right? The bend right here, 4, 5, only a whole step or like 1 fret apart, but here it's 2 frets apart, 4, 5 because of the tuning of the guitar. Same idea though, and of course I can, instead of bend, I can just play the flat 5. Can also do it down an octave, which sounds pretty cool. Right? You can also add in another note if you want to do that. A little bit of a stretch, much easier to do up top. That would be this. 1, flat 3, 4, flat 5, 5 and 1 at the same time. We've kind of already talked about a lick like that, but I'm sure you've heard those before. That idea itself is pretty cool, just barring right here, letting the notes bleed out as you play them, the flat 3, 5, and 1, and then just messing around with some of these other notes. Very classic idea. Do that one more time. Right, just holding all the notes as much as possible. That's a cool one. Another one you can do is kind of playing or structuring a lick idea kind of based on particular criteria. So I had this idea right here. This is one of the fingerings we just talked about. Right, kind of the same one I was doing just here on the E string. And I told myself I want to play a figure that is 3 notes per string, but that is also not like these huge jumps right here because it was a comfortable spot and I like the tone. So I've got 1 note here, root, flat 3, 4, flat 5. I know my 5 is right here. Now I want to get 2 more notes to kind of keep it 3 notes per string. What can I do? I can of course play 5, flat 7, 1, but I don't want to do a stretch like that. What else can I do? How about 5, natural 6, flat 7? Right? That gives me the sound of like minor 6, like a 2 chord. So now I'm getting a very different sound just by forcing myself to stick to this criteria that I've just made. Right? Next string, that's just naturally where I would go. 1, 2, flat 3 to fill it out, making it 3 notes per string. I can sneak in a 2 whenever I want. It's part of the sound. Next string, our core group, 4, flat 5, 5. How about the next string, flat 7, 1, 2? So I'm ending on 2. Again, forcing myself to stick to this criteria, 3 notes per string, is giving me this cool idea that maybe I wouldn't come up with otherwise. And I can, access the 2 and all that stuff because it sounds cool. And then I can do any kind of technical shenanigans that I have associated with 3 note per string shapes. Maybe something like this. I kind of also added an extra little note down there. That's the natural 7, but that's besides the point. So that, again, forced myself to create a lick that's got 3 notes per string and just looking around for other notes that I can add in whenever I want, knowing where those notes are. Like if I added natural 6, which I did right here, how did I know where that note was? Because I know it's always up a whole set from 5. So if I know where 5 is, which I do, because this is 1, flat 3, 4, flat 5, 5, like we just talked about, that's natural 6. So I can add it in kind of wherever I see fit. So that's a cool one I like. The next one is very similar to what we've already done, but kind of simpler. And that's kind of almost playing an arpeggio, but keeping that core 4, flat 5, 5 sound happening. So you're really just playing 1, flat 3, 4, flat 5, 5. And then just doing it again. 1, flat 3, 4, flat 5, 5. So descending also sounds really cool. And just finding a fingering that's comfortable. Maybe you can try like this. And then if this is your root right here, drop down to the 5 and playing it like that. So you see the value of having multiple fingerings because that allows me to stay in this position. Whereas if I do this, I'm forced to move back, but if I play this other fingering instead of the 3 notes on 1 string, if I play the 5 here, then flat 5, 4, flat 3, 1, I can stay here. That's a cool fingering, right? I'm using kind of a different technique too that allows me to do like a little mini sweep right there. Right? How about I do it up top? Really easy. So that's 1, playing the normal 5, flat 5, 4, flat 3. So you can see that fingering, right? What was the fingering? 2 notes on 1 string, 1 on the next, 4, flat 5, 5. That seems to be the best fingering for this idea, right? Kind of an arpeggio. 1, right down to 5, then flat 5, 4, flat 3, 1. At least I think it's the most comfortable for me. So again, having multiple fingerings allows you to come up with these ideas in a more kind of complete way where you're finding the shapes that make the most sense for you. This next one I like a lot too because it's kind of silly sounding, and that's a shape that's based off this kind of standard minor pentatonic. Sounds like this. Right, that kind of classic, just moving around with a little pattern, except I'm going to play the flat 5 on the way down. Sounds like this. Now, naturally, that's probably what you would do. Play the flat 5, go right to the normal 5. Flat 5, 5, continue down. What I'm going to do now is play the flat 5 again. So I'm going to play this. flat 5, and then I'm going to grab this flat 5 that I figured out that's kind of coming from our third fingering, where we're 1 fret back from the normal 5. That one's kind of cool because we get this sound. The 2 flat 5s in a row, and because they're on different strings, they kind of have this different tone. It almost sounds like you're hearing someone sing and they're going wow, 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 like that. Wow, wow, wow. Very unique sound, and that's because they're on 2 different strings, but they're the same note. And you can kind of finish the lick however you want. A variation that I was doing was kind of cool. It sounded like this. So that's me doing like a little kind of arpeggio, again, featuring the 2 right there. All right, how about I sneak in flat 5 again? Let's try that. So you see, I mean, that lick I wasn't even planning on doing, but I just noticed the flat 5 right there at the bottom of this shape. I noticed, I'm ending on 5 right there. Feels like a little arpeggio I'm doing. This is 2 flat 7 5 of my root right there. I'm on 5, so I might as well come down a little, minor pentatonic with flat 5 using that core little 3 notes. Why would I do that shape? Because I'm on my pinky right here. Pinky would yield this fingering very easy. Right? So you see, just experimenting with these fingerings, knowing all the options, knowing where this note is located in a variety of different places can just give you so many different ideas that will naturally happen as you're experimenting, right? So you really, at the end of the day, knowing the fretboard makes this process much easier. So, I would definitely spend some time doing that, but always keep in mind the multiple fingerings, things will be a lot easier. And the last thing I want to do, not going to talk too much about it because it is pretty simple. Everything that you're doing, everything that we're talking about right here can be done exactly the same way, for the most part, over the relative major of the chord you're playing. So right now we're on E flat minor. What's the relative major? Always up 3 frets. That's G flat major, right? Every single idea will work over G flat major as well. You can even pretend you're playing E flat minor the whole time, and those notes will function. Why? The 4 flat 5 5 of the minor chord we've been talking about, over the relative major, it's 2 flat 3 3 over that chord. So that's a common sound. How many times have you heard that? It's the same exact thing. That's probably why it works so well between both sounds. The only thing you kind of have to do is organize which notes you're emphasizing. So for example, when we're playing E flat minor, like if I do the classic, see this note that I'm ending on right here? That's E flat. That's the root of the minor, root of the relative minor. If I want to play over the relative major, this note is not a chord tone. So if I'm playing and sitting on this, I'm actually emphasizing a non-chord tone. I'm emphasizing the 6 of this chord. So if you're playing over this, you can play the same exact licks, just change the notes that you end on. So maybe this. End on that, because that's going to be the root of the actual major chord you're on, but the lick is exactly the same. I'm just ending how I'm terminating the idea or what notes I'm emphasizing, right? So we'll talk more about this stuff in the future. Really pretty easy to do. That does it for part 1 of this lesson on using the powerful flat 5. Stay tuned for future lessons where we start to feature this note a little bit more, making our playing sound a little nastier. As usual, if you enjoy this type of instructional material, feel free to check out my Patreon at the link below, and I'll see you all in the next one.